Hello, everybody, and welcome back to more Political Excess. Today, I've got another hypothetical 2024 presidential matchup for you. This time, let's try Gretchen Whitmer for the Democrats against Lee Zeldin for the Republicans. I realize this matchup is not going to happen, but both of these people had a decent night in the midterms in their own ways, so let's just see what would happen if they faced off in the next election. And as I always say, it depends on what the environment is like, what the national issues are at the time, if there's any scandals, how these candidates run their campaigns, etc. So the safe states are over a 10-point margin, likely 5 to 10 points, lean under 5 points, and tilt 1 point or less. So let's get started. And right off the bat, I will say that Lee Zeldin, he did run a stronger race than anticipated. Got it relatively close in New York, and that is a deep blue state. He has not won a statewide race before, so that is kind of a knock on his record. But I think he did fire up a lot of the electorate. He has a lot of energy, and I think his appeal would be fairly reasonable. He's definitely not as off-putting as someone like Donald Trump. But again, it depends on the kinds of issues he's making the centerpiece of his campaign. And as for Gretchen Whitmer, she's won re-election as governor of Michigan. It wasn't even a close election, so that's 1+ for her. I think a lot of women, probably in the suburbs mostly, would like to come out and support her. But I also think her personality is not going to have as broad of appeal as she would like it to in a lot of parts of the country. So let's start in Alaska. I think that would be safe for Lee Zeldin. Trump won that by about 10 points. I think Zeldin could even improve upon that margin. Hawaii, no contest. That's going to be safe for Gretchen Whitmer. Let's go back up to the West Coast with Washington, Oregon, and California. Those are all going to be safe for Whitmer. I think Zeldin would do a little bit better than Trump, but not get anything under 10 points. How about in Nevada? That I have as a lean for Lee Zeldin. Probably only by a couple of points, but this is a state where I think Lee Zeldin would have more appeal than Gretchen Whitmer. The more blue-collar and working-class areas, I think would resonate more with someone like Lee Zeldin. I just don't see Gretchen Whitmer connecting with that kind of voter as much as someone like Lee Zeldin would. I'm not saying Lee Zeldin would speak to every one of their issues, but he would do a little bit better of a job, I think, than Gretchen Whitmer would, so Zeldin would win Nevada. Idaho, Utah, safe for Lee Zeldin. How about in Arizona? That I also have as a lean for Zeldin. I know Republicans have had a little bit of trouble winning Arizona as of late, but if Lee Zeldin did so strongly in New York, I think he would at least do a couple of points better than Donald Trump did, and he'd be able to win Arizona by at least 1 or 2 points. Montana and Wyoming is safe for Zeldin. Colorado, well, that's going to go for Whitmer. The only question is, what would the margin be? I ended up putting it as a likely. I'm sure it would be over 5 points, but I think it could probably get under 10. I think the Republican brand in Colorado is kind of tainted pretty bad, and almost any Democrat would be able to win it. How about in New Mexico? This is also going to go for Whitmer, but it's a tough call on the margin. I settled on a lean, but it could easily go likely. I'm thinking right about a 5-point margin, but maybe it's 8 or 9 for Whitmer. I don't necessarily see New Mexicans being fired up for someone like Whitmer, and as like in Colorado, Republicans have an uphill climb. But if Lee Zeldin does run a strong campaign, I think he could get it down just barely to a lean margin. North Dakota, South Dakota, safe for Zeldin. Nebraska at large, safe for Zeldin. The 2nd District, that will go as a lean for Whitmer. It did get a little more red since redistricting, but that kind of area, the suburbs, I think they're just going to be a little bit too enamored with Gretchen Whitmer to switch over to Lee Zeldin. Kansas and Oklahoma, that'll be safe for Zeldin. Texas, that'll be likely for Zeldin. Not exactly sure how well Zeldin would do in the South and in Texas, but I think he would probably do well enough to at least keep it to a Trump margin win, but I don't think it would be under 5 points, and I don't think Whitmer would have a ton of appeal in Texas outside of the expected blue areas. Up to Minnesota, this is a tough call, but I have it as a lean for Whitmer, probably right around 5 points again, but it's hard to predict because I think Lee Zeldin would actually not do so bad in Minnesota like a lot of other Republicans would. I know Trump actually almost won this in 2016, but Whitmer, she might do well in some of these states, given she is from the upper Midwest. She even has some of the accent, so that might help her as well, but Minnesota tends to be a blue state on a national level, so Whitmer would win. How about in Iowa? That I have as just over a safe margin for Lee Zeldin. It's possible it gets down to 8 or 9 points, but I actually think Zeldin would do reasonably well in Iowa, as well as some of these other upcoming states. Let's go to Missouri. That'll be safe for Zeldin. Not much explanation needed. Missouri is pretty much a red state. Same with Arkansas, Louisiana. All safe for Zeldin. How about up in Wisconsin? This does border Michigan, so that could help Whitmer on the margins, But at the same time, I don't necessarily think they're going to care too much about that, and I'm giving this to Lee Zeldin with a tilt margin. Wisconsin has trended slowly to the right, and I think Lee Zeldin would have enough appeal in the red Trump counties. He wouldn't get as dominated in the deep blue counties. It would mostly come down to the suburbs in the WOW counties. Whitmer would do all right, Zeldin would do all right, and I think this would come out to just a slight win for Zeldin. Illinois would stay safe for Whitmer. Let's go to Michigan, Whitmer's home state. That I put as a likely for Whitmer. I think it's safe to say she would win her home state by at least 5 points. I don't think it would get over 10 points, but I think her being in the race would largely take Michigan off the map for being competitive. Indiana, safe for Zeldin. Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, safe for Zeldin. How about down in Florida? That I have as a lean for Zeldin. We don't know exactly how far Florida is going to trend to the right on a presidential level yet, but I think it's safe to say that most Republicans will be able to win the state at this point, and Lee Zeldin, he's not a weak candidate, and he'd probably be able to win this by at least 3, maybe up to 5 points. Let's go up to Georgia. Of course, Georgia has trended toward the left. Neither of these candidates are from the South at all. I think the Atlanta suburbs would be interested in someone like Gretchen Whitmer. I don't think they would be as against someone like Lee Zeldin, so that would be close. The red Trump counties, they would probably come out for Lee Zeldin. In a lot of these southern states, I don't really think the black vote is going to really be fired up for someone like Gretchen Whitmer, so that could be a negative for her there. But all things considered, I settled on a tilt for Lee Zeldin. I think he would be able to at least not get blown out in the suburbs, get rural turnout up just enough to be able to win it by maybe a half a point or less. Up to South Carolina, that's going to stay safe for Zeldin. North Carolina, this is a tough call. I actually put this as a likely for Lee Zeldin. Just barely over 5 points is what I'm thinking. But of course, it could get down to low single digits. That's completely possible. And let's move over to Ohio. This will be a likely for Zeldin. Another state that is trending toward the right. It does neighbor Michigan. Maybe some of those voters would want to support Whitmer for that reason. But I still think Lee Zeldin, I think he would do reasonably well in the blue-collar working class areas, similar to Nevada, and I think he would have no problem carrying Ohio. I think he could even get close to the Trump margins of 8 or 9 points. West Virginia is an easy safe for Zeldin. Let's go up to Maine. At large, this will be a lean for Gretchen Whitmer. In the 1st district, that is going to be a likely for Whitmer, and in the 2nd district, that will be a safe for Lee Zeldin. Generally, Maine is a bluer state. The 2nd district has really trended toward the right, and I think Lee Zeldin would probably have an easy time winning this. Maybe it gets down under 10, that's possible, but I don't think much lower than 6 or 7 points. The 1st district is going to stay pretty comfortably in Whitmer's column, but the state at large is probably only going to be mid-single digits, maybe 4.5 to 5 points. How about in New Hampshire? This will be a lean for Lee Zeldin. It does seem tough for Republicans to win New Hampshire, but Lee Zeldin, he's from the Northeast. He seems to have the right kind of coalition for electoral success. I don't think Whitmer is necessarily going to have a ton of appeal in the Northeast. She'll have some, but depending on what the issues are at the time, I still think Lee Zeldin will be able to pull out a win here, probably by 1 or 2 points. Vermont will be safe for Whitmer. How about New York, Lee Zeldin's home state? Well, presidential politics are going to be different than local or statewide politics. I think Lee Zeldin would get the margins down much more than anyone else would, but I still think Whitmer would be likely to win this. Trump completely got wiped out in New York, so even if Zeldin lost by 12 points, he'd still have done a lot better. It could be a safe margin for Whitmer, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say it gets under 10 and goes likely for Whitmer. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C. I kept all of those at safe for Whitmer. It's possible if Zeldin runs a great campaign and it's a red-leaning environment that Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, they could get under a 10-point margin. But absent a favorable environment for him, I'm going to just default and give them the safe rating for Whitmer. How about in Pennsylvania? This is a very tough call for me. Pennsylvania does neighbor New York. That could help Lee Zeldin on the margins this time. And it also seems like Republicans have had a hard time winning statewide in Pennsylvania as of late. I really do think this could go either way. It would be very, very close. I ended up settling on a tilt for Gretchen Whitmer. And finally, the last state is Virginia, and that is a likely for Whitmer. And that is my map, and that would result in 282 electoral votes for Lee Zeldin, 256 for Gretchen Whitmer. Lee Zeldin would actually pull out a win here. It would be close, but he would actually be able to get it done. I think he's probably raised his profile in his New York loss for governor. I don't know where he really goes from here because statewide politics in New York, that's going to be a real tough battle for any Republican. The Republicans actually did kind of well in New York on this midterm, so who knows where he goes from here. There are several states that are close and could go either way. I think Gretchen Whitmer is definitely in this race. All she would have to do is flip a couple of states and she's won it. And there's of course a lot of speculation here, but obviously I think Lee Zeldin would actually do well enough to win, and you could tweak the margins in some of these states. But this is what I came up with, so let me know in the comments. Do you agree with most of these ratings, or do you somehow disagree with every one of these? Is that even possible? Let me know down below. And if you enjoy this channel, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.